I want to read to you on this podcast chapter 5 of the book SUPERENERGY, Challenging Beliefs. In his book Sapiens, A Brief History of Mankind, Yuval Noah Harari wrote about the importance of stories and myths in the success of humankind. To quote him, "Any large-scale human cooperation, whether a modern state, a medieval church, an ancient city, or an archaic tribe, is rooted in common myths that exist only in people's collective imagination. Yet none of these things exists outside the stories that people invent and tell one another. There are no gods in the universe, no nations, no money, no human rights, no laws, no justice outside the common imagination of human beings." End of quote. If gods are extraterrestrials, there would be gods in the universe. If that were so, Harari's dogmatic statement that they are figments of our collective imagination would be just his story. Harari didn't mention the stories in science. As a professor of history, he should have an understanding of the history and philosophy of science. If he did, he would have added something to the effect that there are no scientific theories outside the common imagination of human beings. Science is built on stories called axioms, hypotheses, and theories. A major problem we have today is that many educated people, especially the more highly educated, don't seem to appreciate that scientific theories are stories. They seem to believe that they're true. Harari himself fell into this trap. In his more recent book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, while he draws on practically every sphere of human belief, especially religion, to reveal the extent to which we've been taken in by stories, he failed to include the story of materialism. The reason is obvious. He believes in it. In 21 Lessons, Harari wrote, "In itself, the universe is only a meaningless hodgepodge of atoms." That statement by Harari is a summary of the philosophy of materialism or physicalism which most scientists and academics believe, obviously himself included. Despite being overturned by Einstein and disproved in quantum physics, belief in the tenets of materialism increases as the number of people receiving higher education increases. It seems science is causing education to funnel people into the cult of democratism, encouraging them to scorn anyone who questions its dogmas. This is what religions do. It is a human trait. Sapiens are quick to question the beliefs of others, but are not so quick to question their own beliefs. So what I'm saying here is the problem with religions is not a problem with the religions per se. It's a problem with beliefs. And the same problem that we saw arising in religion of dogmatism, narrow-mindedness, and persecution of people who don't go along with the consensus belief systems is occurring in science. Scientists have blind faith in materialism, in the materialism of Democritus, to the same extent that religious people have been accused of having blind faith in God. I mean, scientists follow Democritus just like Christians follow Jesus. There's no difference. The actual beliefs may be different, but the form, which is dogmatic attachment to belief, is a problem that applies to our species, to sapiens. And that is what science is supposed to protect us against. And so the role of science is to challenge beliefs. And most importantly of all, to challenge its own beliefs. So I continue reading. Progress is not made by following mainstream beliefs, but by challenging them, and that is why contesting theories and treating them as stories is so important in science. Albert Einstein didn't make his breakthrough by building on the theories that were accepted in his day. He started a revolution in physics by overturning the tables in the temple of science. He came out with his own radical view of reality, based on a momentary flash of genius, then challenged the accepted axioms of science to make room for his own ideas. To quote Lincoln Stephans from his book, An Autobiography, published by Harcourt Brace in New York in 1931. So this is Lincoln Stephans speaking. We know there is no absolute knowledge, that there are only theories, but we forget this. The better educated we are, the harder we believe in axioms. I asked Einstein in Berlin once how he, a trained, drilled, teaching scientist of the worst sort, a mathematician, physicist, astronomer, had been able to make his discoveries. However did you do it, I exclaimed, and he, understanding and smiling, gave the answer. By challenging an axiom. In the quantum vortex, I challenged the material axiom of Democritus that is endorsed by science and replaced it with a revolutionary idea that subatomic particles are not solid corpuscles of material substance, but are ball vortices of energy that set up an illusion of substantiality. This new axiom has led me to conclude that particles of energy are more like thoughts than things. Intelligence is innate in the quantum, and energy can exist beyond the speed of light. If particles of matter are vortices of physical energy, it would make sense that they could not move faster than the physical speed that forms them. But there is no reason why energy faster than light, within the forms of vortex and wave, could not set up worlds beyond the speed of light. That could account for soul and spirit and life after death, and show that these religious ideas may not be just stories. Most religions are based on belief in the existence of other worlds apart from the physical world we live in. Many also contend that a supreme being in a higher state of reality is responsible for the creation of the universe and life within it. To counter this belief, scientists have proposed a theory of evolution to account for life. There are elements of truth in both these hypotheses that can serve us, but the theory of evolution in science and the theory of creation in monotheistic religions are both flawed. The religious problem lies not so much in the story of creation, because the sequence of events is correct, and even the timing of creation in a week makes sense, because in the theory of the quantum vortex, time has been shown to be relative to size, so billions of years to man could be as days on the scale of the universe. The main problem in Western religions is monotheism. And that's why I applaud Richard Dawkins in his work. I have great respect for Richard Dawkins. I've read The God Delusion and I really enjoyed the read. And I enjoy reading books by atheists where they challenge monotheism, challenge religious beliefs. Because the thing about belief is this: if something that people believe in is true, it will withstand, it will survive all the attacks that are made on it. And the more you attack it, the stronger it grows. So it's a good thing for religions to be attacked by scientists like Dawkins, because they challenge the beliefs. And in Tomorrow's God, part of the Neil Donald Walsh series, Conversations with God, God says this via Neil Donald Walsh. He says, men are going to rise up who are going to challenge your most cherished beliefs in yesterday's God. the old god of religion, the old god of monotheism. And Richard Dawkins is one of those people. So it's really important that if we, as scientists, this is the beauty of science, why I love science, is because you can have an opponent in science whose beliefs are different from your own, but you can regard that person with the highest of esteem. You can really like that person. You can enjoy reading that person's work because you see in science the value of challenging beliefs. Which is something that religion's not very good at doing. I find it very difficult to challenge their own beliefs. So it's an exciting world we live in. I think I'll go straight on to the next chapter. This is chapter 6, Creation. I must admit, I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying reading my own book to you, and I hope you're enjoying listening to it. I do interspace it with my own pieces. I can't resist that. I hope you don't mind. So you're getting a bit more than the book when you listen to these podcasts. So this is chapter 6, and I've got this lovely picture at the front piece of it by William Blake. Western monotheism is based on the idea that an intelligent designer created the universe and life within it. This is rooted in the Bible, which begins with the verse, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth," Genesis 1:1. In the first 24 verses of Genesis, God is presented as the creator of all creatures upon the earth, including humankind. However, with the creation of man, God is no longer presented as a single God, but as the head of a group of gods. Then God said, "Let us make man in our own image and according to our likeness." Genesis 1:26. The Bible is inconsistent in regard to monotheism. Early in the book of Genesis, God appears more as a committee than a single individual. I'll repeat that again. Early in the book of Genesis, God appears more as a committee than a single individual. Something happened to the Bible in its history. Wherever the term God appears in modern Bibles, the word Elohim occurs in ancient versions of the Old Testament. The term Elohim is dominant in the second oldest of the four main Pentateuch sources, the 5 books of Moses, generally known as the Elohist tradition, in which Elohim was used to refer to the Creator. In Hebrew, the term El referred to an all-powerful God, and Elohim, being the plural of El, literally meant the all-powerful gods. At some point in the history of the Bible, a redaction occurred which led to monotheism. One reason for this is there may have been a power struggle amongst the Elohim, and one of them succeeded in taking control. A recent authoritative account of this redaction, which also points to the very real possibility of extraterrestrial involvement in the origins of humanity, is presented by Paul Wallace in his trilogy, Escaping from Eden, The Scars of Eden and the Echoes of Eden. Whatever happened in the Bible, it is clear that someone known as the Lord was in control. This Lord amongst the Elohim is supposed to have taken responsibility for the creation of mankind and appeared to take charge of every situation, which included establishing a safe haven in which to contain his new creature. The Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. Genesis 2:8. The leader of the Elohim laid down the law for mankind, commanding that humans should be kept in innocence and not have knowledge of good and evil, to quote from Genesis 2:16-17. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, "From every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but from the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat the fruit of it you shall surely die." In Genesis 1:27, it's stated that man and woman were created together, both male and female, in the image of the Elohim. But a possible insight into the nature of the Elohim can be gleaned from an interaction between the woman and a serpent, to quote from the Bible. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, "Has the Lord indeed said that you shall not eat of every tree in the garden?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat the fruit of the trees in the garden, but of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die." And the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God." And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also to her husband with her, and he did eat. Then the eyes of both of them were opened. Now this is an extraordinary story. A serpent appeared to a woman and advised her to eat from a tree. Even if we accept that snakes talk, how do we account for what the reptile had to say? Consider the implications of this story. The talking snake appeared to know the mind of the Lord. He knew that the Elohim Lord was not allowing the man and woman to know their status in regard to the Elohim gods, and was threatening them with death if they came into that knowledge. The serpent contested that eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge would not kill them, but on the contrary, it would awaken them to who they truly were. To know so much, the serpent must have been a member of the Elohim team. If that was so, all of the Elohim may have been serpents. The story of a talking serpent was one of the most telling in the Bible, as far as I'm concerned, as it revealed the zoology of God. It seemed to suggest that the Elohim gods were reptiles. Some readers may find the concept of God being a group of reptiles too shocking and far-fetched to contemplate. Nonetheless, it could account for the references to serpents and dragons in the Bible and in other scriptures, religions, and mythologies. The more primitive part of our brain is reptilian, with a snake-like spinal column. A serpent is the nervous core of what we are. We could be viewed as serpents, crowned by a cerebral cortex. Genesis could be telling us that we were bioengineered from reptiles. It may be saying we were predated by a humanoid reptile. Let's speculate around the fact that amphibians, reptiles, and dinosaurs existed for millions of years before the advent of mammals, and that life may not be restricted to the planet Earth. Prior to the appearance of the human beings, perhaps hominids evolved elsewhere in the universe from reptiles. Maybe the Elohim emerged from dinosaur DNA. While the dinosaurs vanished on Earth, elsewhere in the universe, they may have evolved into humanoid types of creature. The tempter of Eve may have been an advanced serpentine hominid. This might explain his ability to talk. If he was one of the Elohim, then the Elohim story might have recorded the arrival on Earth of a team of reptilian extraterrestrials. This would certainly help to explain why, in so many parts of the world, gods are portrayed as serpents. This idea is in Bringers of the Dawn, a book written by Barbara Marciniak, published by Bear & Co. in 1993, a book I highly recommend you read if you can get hold of a copy. It's not a scientific or academic book, but it contains information that appears to corroborate much of what I have been saying. presented by Barbara Marciniak, the information it contains comes supposedly from humanoids on a planet orbiting a star in the constellation of the Pleiades. To quote from Bringers in the Dawn, "Your history has been influenced by a number of light beings whom you term God. In the Bible, many of these beings have been combined to represent one being, when they are not one being at all, but a combination of very powerful extraterrestrial light being energies. They were indeed awesome energies from our perspective, and it is easy to understand why they were glorified and worshipped. Who are these gods from ancient times? These beings were passed down through the ancient cultures of many societies as winged creatures and balls of light. The creator gods who have been ruling this planet have the ability to become physical, though mostly they exist on other dimensions. The gods raided this reality, just like corporate raiders in your time. Before the raid, you had tremendous abilities. A biogenetic manipulation was done, and there was much destruction. Your DNA was scattered and scrambled by the raiders a long time ago. Certain entities took the existing species, which was indeed a glorious species, and retooled it for their own uses. These creator gods set out to alter the DNA inside the human body. The creator gods are space beings who have their own home in space. They are also evolving. These space beings are part human and part reptilian. So I go back to my own book. If humans were originally bioengineered in the image and likeness of space beings, these space beings must have appeared similar to us, thinking and acting much as we do. The only difference being that their bodies originated from reptilian stock rather than mammalian. In fact, we could be them with mammalian characteristics genetically spliced into their original reptilian DNA. In our beginning, we may have been glorious, a glorious creation of the Elohim, subsequently retooled in a rebellion led by a rogue member of the group. That may be how the redaction to monotheism occurred. The talking serpent may have been a member of the breakaway group, reneging on his rebel master, the one monotheists worship as God. There could be a lot more to the story of mankind than is revealed in the book of Genesis. Nonetheless, our genetic connection to the Elohim is made clear in ongoing verses. So I read from the Bible now. Book of Genesis, chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, of all whom they chose. And also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. To come into women and have children by them, the Elohim and their sons must have had a species compatibility with humankind. This would have been possible if the Elohim bioengineered humanity by splicing genes from terrestrial mammals into their own species chromosomes. If, after upgrading their bodies from reptile to mammal, from the mammalian gene pool of the earth, they reincarnated into the new human bodies they had formed, then most certainly they could have procreated with other humans. If this sounds far-fetched, just consider the implications of extraterrestrial hominids being around for millions of years prior to humankind. If this was so, it is possible they may have evolved on other planets to a point of high capability. Like us, they may have developed advanced scientific and technical capabilities of genetic engineering. The Earth is just a small planet on the outskirts of one among billions of galaxies. There could be trillions of planetary systems, and amongst them many that are capable of supporting life. With billions of years to evolve in and millions of planets to evolve on, it is possible that there are civilizations of intelligent life forms more advanced than us. From an abundance of circulating information, terrestrial science appears to be primitive by universal standards. In my books, The Vortex Key to Future Science and The New Science of the Spirit, The New Physics of Consciousness and Awaken, and later in this book, I argue that it may be possible to alter the speed of energy in the quantum vortex so matter can be changed from a state of physical energy to superenergy. This capability would enable bodies to move in and out of space-time rather than through it. By this means, advanced extraterrestrials could have overcome the perceived limitations of travel between the stars and visited our planet to bioengineer us. The book of Genesis in the Bible makes sense if the Elohim were advanced beings who came to Earth from outer space. Genesis becomes plausible if they are viewed as the extraterrestrial bioengineers of humanity. This could also help provide an answer to the missing link in human evolution. Humanoid remains have been found on the Earth that are up to 4.5 million years of age. Yet leading geneticists state that the DNA for the planetary population of human beings can only be traced back to a common root about 200,000 years ago. There are scant records because so much of the historical record was destroyed. Nothing survived the burning of the Egyptian library of Memphis. 200,000 irreplaceable volumes were lost in the destruction of the library of Pergamos. The Romans incinerated 500,000 priceless manuscripts in the destruction of Carthage. And the Christian Romans were responsible for destroying the greatest library in antiquity at Alexandria, where an estimated 700,000 handwritten volumes went up in flames. The sacking of Constantinople caused the loss of yet more records from the past. And what the Inquisition didn't destroy, the Catholic Church has hidden from view in the Vatican vaults. Reliable records of extraterrestrial serpentine scientists tinkering with our genes may have been lost in these and other catastrophes. Fortunately, earlier records have surfaced that appear to confirm that visitors from space took command of the skies and interfered in our evolution. Archaeological discoveries in the 19th century uncovered cuneiform records on hundreds of thousands of clay tablets uncovered from the ancient Sumerian civilization, which is where the book of Genesis appears to have come from. They provide overwhelming support for interpretation that the Elohim were extraterrestrials. Cuneiform Babylonian tablets in the British Museum describe the phases of Venus, the 4 moons of Jupiter, the 7 satellites of Saturn, none of which could have been seen from ancient Babylon. The Turkish maps of Piri Reis, dating back to the early 16th century, are alleged to be based on earlier maps predating Alexander the Great. They accurately depict the Amazon basin of South America and the northern coastline of Antarctica, neither of which was surveyed until the advent of aircraft in the 20th century. The coastline of Antarctica, that has been under ice for several thousand years, is clearly defined in these maps. The Dogon tribe of Africa have an accurate knowledge of the solar system. They claim their forebears received it from visitors from space. Many people researching the ancient records support Marciniak's reference to a raid by reptilian gods and the bioengineering of mankind. In his 1997 book, The God Hypothesis, Dr. Joe Lowells, former head of the Department of Journalism at the University of Texas at El Paso, gave the opinion that Jehovah was a reptilian being of flesh and blood who flew in craft and used a vehicle to transport Moses to the summit of Mount Sinai. And as stated in the Bible, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Exodus 19:4. Lewis also noted that Moses and the Israelites were never allowed to see Jehovah's face, and wondered if his countenance was so non-human as to provoke fear and loathing. It should be pointed out that this is not the least of an original idea, wrote Lewis, speaking of the Mandeans, an early Jewish sect who believed in a dualistic universe, divided equally into the worlds of light and darkness. To quote him, "To them the physical world, including the earth, was created and ruled over by the Lord of Darkness, a reptilian being, variously called snake, dragon, monster, and Gaian, thought to be the creator of humanity." This same concept was advanced by researcher and author R.A. Boulay, who noted that practically all cultures of the world have stories of dragons or reptilians who coexisted with man, even created man, and were associated with powerful gems or crystals, walked on legs, flew in the air, fought over territory, and were revered by humans as gods. In Flying Serpents and Dragons, the story of mankind's reptilian past, Boulay wrote, "The worldwide depiction of flying reptiles makes it abundantly clear that our creators and ancestors were not of mammalian origin, but were an alien saurian breed." In the Gnostics, by Tobias Churton, he wrote, "There were Jewish schools much given to speculation on the nature of God and the constituent beings which constituted his emanation or projection of being. Some of them appear to have been profoundly disappointed with the God of the Old Testament and wrote commentaries on the Jewish scriptures, asserting that the God described there was a lower being who had tried to blind man from seeing his true nature and destiny. We hear their echoes in some books of the Nag Hammadi library, namely the Acryphon of John and the Apocalypse of Adam. They believe in a figure, the eternal man, or the Adam Kadmon, who was a glorious reflection of the true God, and who had been duped into an involvement with the lower creation, with earthly matter, ruled by an inferior deity who, with his angels, made human bodies." Angels are extraterrestrial by definition. The creation of man, as described in the scripts of Genesis, has parallels in myths originating from cultures as diverse as those of the Tibetans, the Hawaiians, the Australian Aborigines, the North American Indians, such as the Apache, the Hopi, the Sioux, the Maya, and on tablets found on Easter Islands. These all speak of the involvement of space gods in the creation of man. The ancient Sumerian texts in cuneiform script on clay tablets are especially significant as they predate the Bible, and the biblical patriarch Abraham was a native of Sumer. The knowledge he derived from that civilization was passed down to his people and recorded in Genesis. The Sumerian records portrayed in the 12th Planet in the Earth Chronicles by Zechariah Sitchin tell that about 450,000 years ago, two half-brothers, Enki and Enlil, descended as gods from the heavens to the earth. Sitchin emphasized the consistency of this claim. To quote him, "The statement that the first to establish settlements on Earth were astronauts from another planet was not lightly made by the Sumerians. In text after text, whenever the starting point was recalled, it was always this: 432,000 years before the deluge, the Din Gear, translated as righteous ones of the sky ships, came down to Earth from their own planet." According to the Sumerian records, climatic changes about 200,000 years ago caused the Din Gear to create mankind as a hybrid of their own breed and to stock the earth that would be better adapted for the new climatic conditions than their own workers. To begin with, we were infertile mules produced in batches. Only later was our ability to reproduce switched on. Obviously, from a modern perspective, this could be interpreted as genetic engineering. In Rule by Secrecy, Jim Marrs discusses the 500,000 clay tablets of cuneiform text recovered from excavations of the ancient ruins of the Sumer civilization in Iraq, and concludes the introduction of civilization to the Fertile Crescent by extraterrestrials occurred some 6,000 years ago. In his Eden series 1, 2, and 3, Paul Wallace suggested that the book of Genesis was not dealing with the creation of the earth, but an Elohim rescue and recovery program after a global cataclysm less than 12,000 years ago that left the earth flooded and the skies darkened. Dr. Arthur David Horn resigned as professor of biological anthropology at Colorado State University in 1990 after he concluded that the conventional explanation for man's origins he taught were nonsense. After much study, he too came to the conclusion that extraterrestrials were intricately involved in the origin and development of humanity. Smith's author, Eric von Daniken, was harshly criticized by mainstream scientists and theologians over his 1968 book on ancient astronauts, Chariots of the Gods. But discoveries in archaeology and anthropology have reinforced his theories. Harsh criticism was to be expected, as Chariots of the Gods proved to be very popular. It sold over 14 million copies. In its day, it was the top-selling non-fiction book of all time. The extensive and detailed records of the Sumer civilization that predate the Bible are not generally accepted because science is not impartial. Science is highly censored. In Forbidden Archaeology, Michael Cremo wrote, and I quote him here, "There exists in the scientific community a knowledge filter that screens out unwelcome evidence. This process of knowledge filtration has been going on for well over a century and continues right up to our day." And to quote again from Rule by Secrecy by Jim Marrs, "But woe to those who attempt to argue against the conventional thinking. One particularly exasperating researcher wrote," that was Jonathan Starbright in 1999, "realize that scientific institutions such as the Smithsonian and the National Geographic Society were set up by the world's elite factions in the first place to either debunk, distort, or simply ignore any scientific data that tends to enlighten people of their true origin. If the evidence of extraterrestrial involvement in the origins of our species is to be believed, then it is unlikely that life originated on Earth. Paul Wallace details how over time, not just humans, but other species were introduced to the Earth by visitors from space. It is more likely that life is widely spread throughout the universe, and many leading cosmologists believe this to be the case. So I'll leave it there. That's the end of that chapter, in fact, the end of the 2 chapters. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you again, I trust, when I do my next podcast, which will be on Darwin's theory of evolution. Thank you very much.